Well, post-trade deadline for non-competitive teams is the time of year of individual evaluation. So we are going to talk about the players with the most to gain and lose the rest of the season, all today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Tuesday, August 6th, 2024. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs come to an end. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome in, welcome all. Happy Tuesday, everybody. So the Tigers had an off day on Monday. You know what's great about off days? You can't lose. So we're not talking about a loss today. That was funny. It kind of sad, I guess, how times change. That used to be the joke with the Lions for so many years, right? Was, oh, it's a bye week. They can't lose. LOL. Everybody laugh. And now we're using that with our Detroit Tigers. And the Lions are making NFC championships and on Netflix shows and getting Hard Knocks and you name it. The Lions are the big ticket team in town. Always kind of weird. So I did want to take some time today and just break down. I know not post trade deadline, but around the All-Star break, we talked about kind of what to look for the rest of the season and what I was expecting in the second half of the year. I want to narrow that conversation a little bit more and talk specifically about individual players. And I think now, look, we have my calendar is right here. We have the next 3 Mondays off. So we're going to have a lot of big picture conversations in the month of August. I wanted to start with this one because I think it's the most time dependent, right? Like I want to talk about the players that have, and we did a similar conversation to this in spring training, right? Was what players have the most to gain and lose this spring training? It's kind of a similar conversation the rest of the way, right? We're not playing for wins and losses. We are all now focused. Those of us who are still crazy enough and ridiculously stupid enough to be watching this team every game, even though they are uncompetitive and not going to fight for anything as far as like the standings go. There are reasons to keep watching. There are a lot of reasons to keep watching. And I want to highlight the individual players who have the most to gain and lose the rest of the way. So that's what today's episode is going to be about. And then, we'll have a mailbag at some point in the next couple of weeks. We'll do a lot of big picture. We might do a minor league kind of, recap of what's going on. But today, again, is the most time dependent because of where we're at in the season. So let's just kick it off. I don't know how to transition into that. So let's start with I'm going to save the player that I think has the most to gain or lose for the very, very end. He'll be the last one we talk about, but the rest of these are in no particular order. Okay. I'm going to start with Joey Wentz. And I know that immediately that is going to be like, oh my goodness, let it go, dude. Like he has nothing to gain or lose. He's, not good. He's not going to be here, et cetera, et cetera. I understand. But I think that for me, I'm stunned that he's still on the roster, given how he's played. So I think the organization is just going to ride it out. And I fully expect and anticipate him to continue struggling or continue, I don't even know if struggling is the right way to put it, continue looking how he has looked so far this season and the rest of the way. This is not me saying that I expect him to look any different. But I do think that if he was to go on a 2-month-long heater where he was one of the better relievers in this bullpen, a bullpen that has struggled mightily since the end of April, that him being a lefty and the age that he is and the ability to go multiple innings, if there was a reality in which he would be really good, again, the rest of the season, that he could play himself onto at least a spring training competition or something next season. Do I anticipate that to happen? No. So he's where I'm going to start. The next player is also in the bullpen, and that's Alex Faedo. Faedo is one of the few players in the pen currently that actually has swing and miss stuff, especially post trade deadline where you get rid of Andrew Chafin. That he might be the only guy that has consistent swing and miss stuff. And so I think that in a perfect world, the Tigers, after game 162 this year, head into October and go, you know what? Alex Faedo can get swings and misses. He's got a really good slider. The velocity isn't bad out of the pen, and he can go multiple innings if we really need him to. This guy is going to be a fixture in our bullpen going forward. Now, that also is far from a guarantee. He has had a wildly inconsistent season, and I'm pretty curious about Faedo. You know what? Am I going to restart the show and delete this entire thing and start? No. Well, you know what? We're going to call an audible here. We're going to call an audible. And I'm just going to throw out there the entire bullpen is probably in this conversation, to be completely honest with you. We're talking about auditioning for 2025, right? I really think that, like, I was going to go through and I had a couple more individual names. I think you could just say the entire bullpen. Jason Foley, not fighting for a roster spot next season, but probably fighting for a role in the bullpen next year, right? If he was to go back and start hitting 100 again and looking like he did in April, then maybe they're not as, motivated to go get a flame-throwing, big swing and miss closer for next season, right? I still think they should, right, as it stands right now. But if Foley was to look like the best reliever in baseball or look incredible with a 0 ERA the rest of the season, like he did again in April of this year, I think that changes the outlook of him going forward. Shelby Miller, I think, is gone. I don't really, he's kind of omitted from this. Tyler Holton, I think his status on the team is pretty set. Will Vest has to play well if he wants to play himself into being in the mix come spring training next year. Joey Wentz, we already talked about. Bo Brisky, a huge member of this list, right? Like a huge fixture in the category of auditioning for next year, right? Having to play himself into the conversation next season. His ERA has ballooned. He has struggled mightily. And going into the season, there was a lot of optimism around him, especially coming out of spring training. There was a ton of optimism surrounding Bo Brisky. A lot of that has subsided because he has struggled, and he still doesn't have a good major league pitch that moves horizontally, which I'm sure you're tired of me saying, but I'm going to continue saying it. Kenta Maeda. Look, Maeda's going to be on this roster in the winter and probably in the spring and probably start off next season. In a perfect world, he looks so good magically out of nowhere that he's back into the rotation and you go, oh my goodness, we have another starter. I don't think anyone thinks that's happening. I don't think that's happening. I kind of don't even include him on this list. Like, yes, in a perfect world, if he looks incredible, then you can go, okay, at least we have a good long reliever. I don't think it matters. Like, if he has a 12 ERA or if he has a 0 ERA, I think he's probably coming out of the pen next season. This has been a disastrous signing. Unfortunately, we already talked about Faedo. Brendan Hanafy. I don't think it's likely he's in the bullpen to start off the season next year, but certainly is playing for, his status in the organization going into the winter. Brian Sammons, I guess you could argue the same thing. Brant Herter, you absolutely could argue the same thing. So I really do think that 80% of this bullpen are kind of all auditioning for, are you going to be here next year or not? And I think there's really strong cases for both ways for a lot of them. What a disaster this bullpen has turned into seemingly overnight. And I don't mean, obviously it's not overnight from April to now, but it happened in May, right? Like, this was the best bullpen in baseball in April. And then by the end of May, it was a train wreck, and it has been ever since. So I think a lot of these guys, especially the guys with team control that are, under control or under contract going into next year, I think are really kind of playing for their roles on the team. Okay, let's move on from the bullpen. Got a few more players that I want to talk about on the offensive side of the ball. Got one starting pitcher I want to talk about, and then some players in the minor leagues currently on the 40-man roster as well. We will get into all of those right after this. Got a talk to you today about our friends over at supplyhouse.com. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trade, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. You can shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. If you need help with an order, get expert support from the industry-leading service and the friendliest folks in the business, and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining supplyhouse.com's free Trademaster program. Every Trademaster gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every single order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate you all for tuning in as always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow recapping Game 1 of the Seattle Mariners series that's kicking off today as you're listening to this. We'll preview that at the end of the episode. Also, be sure to make Locked On MLB your second listen. Host Paul Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here to provide daily national expertise with his trademark humor and get you ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Again, Locked On MLB, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, talked a lot about the bullpen. That was pretty much all of segment 1. Was discussing the bullpen and how nearly every single player in there kind of falls into this conversation about players that have the most to play for the rest of the way. And obviously everyone should be trying their best. That's not to say that everybody else that's not on here can just like roll over. No, like we're trying to be as competitive as we can be. And, we can argue about how competitive that's going to end up being until we're blue in the face. But like Riley Greene, when he comes back and is healthy, what is he playing for? He's going to be a heart of the lineup player next year, even if he struggles post-injury. Kerry Carpenter, same thing. Even if he comes back, he's not going to be like off the team if he struggles the rest of the way post-injury this season. You know what I mean? So like when talking about the offensive players that have a lot to play for, I really think both of our catchers are weirdly in this conversation on kind of different sides of the aisle, right? Dylan Dingler has been a talked about prospect for 4 years now, and he went to college. So he's not like a spring chicken. This is not a 21, 22-year-old that you're plugging in the lineup and going, okay, like if it doesn't work out, that's not the worst thing in the world. We can kind of slowly send him back, whatever. Like this dude's in his mid-20s. It's time to see what we have in him. And I'm very glad that post-trade deadline we are seeing what we have in him. And I've been pretty content, I'll say, with what I've seen so far from him. I think the conversation around what catcher looks like changes dramatically if Dingler and Rogers both go on a tear the rest of the season, right? If both of them are crushing the ball and are good defensively and the pitchers like throwing to them, and et cetera, then that's 2 months, second half of the year. You're pretty confident in what you have. They're both under team control for a while. They're both relatively young. Rogers is pushing 30 now, but the point remains. And all of that being said, you go into next year and go, okay, maybe we can sign a depth catcher in free agency, right? Like Dustin Garneau back in the day. For those who, I say back in the day, this is like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. For those who remember, he was like the epitome of that, right? Like they brought him in on a minor league deal. He'd get called up when an injury for a catcher would happen, and then he'd get sent right back down when they were healthy. Like maybe they bring in somebody like that. But you are more confident in, okay, I know who our two catchers are going to be going into the year. If and I'm using Rodgers for this example, but really if either of them struggle from here on out, then that changes dramatically, right? Dingler is probably going to be on the roster in some capacity next season. And Rodgers, aside from getting, like traded or anything, which I guess we can talk about in the offseason, as it stands right now, both of them have a very clear path to being on the roster, is I guess the picture I'm trying to paint here. However, I think it's far from a guarantee. And I think if both of them struggle, especially if it's like Jake Rodgers, again, hitting under 200 and has an OPS that starts with a number 5 currently, some pass balls, et cetera, I really do think that there is a reality where we go into October, November, and we go, we don't like a catcher. I don't think that that's very far-fetched at all. I read my own comments. I know how some people feel about Jake Rodgers. I would even say that some people are like, I feel that way right now. I want a catcher today. I want to go into the winter anticipating that the Tigers are going to go after a catcher. So I think that both of their performance is really important to watch because I think it really does make the picture a lot clearer of what they're going to do behind the plate going forward. Justin Henry Malloy, I think, is in this conversation as well. Just defensively, and he's been DHing a lot because the defense isn't very good, but I feel like from here on out, he should probably get some more opportunities to play defense, just so, again, we know what we have. We learned something new, etc. But I think that he's definitely on here. He like I said yesterday, I mentioned, I think that he's been taking some steps in the right direction. But I also think there's still a very long way to go before I'm confident in his swing at the major league level, like long term. Right now, it's kind of all or nothing in the sense that he's either walking, hitting a home run, or striking out. Like that, he is very much a 3 true outcome type of hitter. And I think in a perfect world, you want to develop him a little bit more. If the 2025 season started tomorrow, I do not think that Malloy would have a major league roster spot carved out for himself, at least a guaranteed one. Maybe we'll say going into spring training instead. I think he would have to earn that major league spot. But that being said, I think that if he can continue making adjustments and make some mechanical adjustments, etc., and look good the rest of the way, forgot a word there, that he could play himself into being a little bit more, okay, we're confident that Malloy can be the DH next year, or that he can, was good enough defensively where he can maybe play some corner outfield, stuff like that. I think that he's a player that's definitely to watch for in terms of, again, role looking ahead. Let's talk about some players that are currently in the minor leagues that I think are playing for a lot the rest of the way. Akil Baddoo. I debated even putting him on here. There was a part of me that just went, I think it's over. Like, I don't think... Now, he still has, I think, an option left, so that's why I ultimately did put him on here. But I do think that there is a reality in which Akil Baddoo is let go this winter. I think that he just has so many adjustments to still make. He hits AAA pitching really well, and then he comes up to the majors, and he just has a ton of swing and miss and a ton of strikeouts. And he walks a lot, and he's fast. And he's, a fine defender. He's not a plus defender, but he's a fine defender. He's got some power when he does hit the ball. There's a lot of stuff to like with Akil Baddoo's profile. And if they did let him go, another team would 100% take a chance on him, especially considering how old he still is, or how young, I guess, he still is. But I do think that the clock is ticking with this and with Baddoo specifically. And if he finds himself on the major league roster at some point the rest of the year, he's going to have to show that he's made some adjustments. And if he doesn't, I think that, again, he still has an option. So I think you don't have to, move on from him, but I think there is a world in which they do. So he's somebody that I think is, whether he's in the minors or the majors, is somebody to kind of keep an eye out for the rest of the way. I got two more players in the minors, and then I saved the player, he's in the majors, that I think has the most to gain or lose the rest of the way. We'll get to all of those right after this. Got to talk to you today about our friends over at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop, but the playoffs are far, far, far removed now. They ended a while ago, NBA and NHL. So we get fewer and fewer games in August, this time of year, and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and make the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment, Locked on Tigers. Appreciate you all for tuning in as always. So a couple more players down in Toledo that I think have a lot to gain and or lose the rest of the way. One is Matt Manning. Get healthy. But I also think that we're running thin on the Matt Manning experience as well. This is a guy who I think, me personally, but I think a lot of people fully anticipated to just make the roster out of spring training, and he didn't. And he hasn't really been up too much. Some double headers that he's been called up for, some injuries that he got called up for to fill in the void of for a spot start or two. He hasn't really been here very often. I think that that's intentional. I try to combine the words intentional and on purpose there. And something I say all the time, I say this over at Locked On Red Wings, and I say it here a lot, is the organization will always tell you how they feel about a player if you just pay attention and listen to them. I think that is a slam dunk case of what is happening here with Matt Manning. The stuff is just so inconsistent. The fastball is so inconsistent. I really do think that, just him getting healthy is very important here, but I think that he is playing for a ton. If he can play, because look, at the end of the day, we have no starting pitchers on the Major League roster right now. I think if he is at a point where he's healthy and he looks sharp enough to where they're going to call him up, that he could really change the outlook of Matt Manning going into next year. Do I think it's likely? No. To be completely honest with you, I think the organization is going into 2025 with the assumption that Matt Manning is not going to be in this rotation going forward. That's the impression I get on August 6th. But 2 months can change a lot, as we've seen with quite a few players over the years. So we'll see what happens with him. And then Spencer Torkelson, fairly obvious one here. I think he gets called back up relatively soon. I would call him up today and DFA Gio Urshela today. But unfortunately, my last name is Bentley and not Harris. So I am waiting for that to happen. He might be the answer to the player with the most to gain or lose. I think that there's somebody else that has more. Again, we'll talk about him in a second. When it comes to Torque, I just feel like even if, and this is why I ultimately didn't have him as the player with the most, like even if he crushes the ball, right? Let's say he absolutely mashes the last 2 months here. Is anyone fully confident in him going into next season? Right? Like he mashed in the second half of last year. In August of last season, he was arguably the best hitter on the team. It was him and Kerry Carpenter. We're crushing. Torkelson had like 7 homers in 12 games or something ridiculous at one point in August. The last 2 months of the season for him, he was phenomenal. And this still happened. So even if they call him up today and he mashes and you see some mechanical adjustments and et cetera, how confident are we really in him? How much do we believe that? I don't know. I think it certainly would put kind of throw a wrench into the offseason conversation, because I think as it stands right now, people are like, all right, well, we need somebody to play first base next year. And I think if he crushed, that it would maybe be a little bit more difficult and be like, all right, do we do we have to do that? Like, is that something we have to do? So we'll see. But I think that he's certainly on this list. And the player that I think has the most to gain or lose these last 2 months is Keider Montero. I feel like he's just the guy that has the widest variance of possible outcomes depending on how he looks the last 2 months here, right? You're talking about a guy who, at his best, could probably play himself into at least a rotation conversation come spring training. Whereas at his worst, you're talking about you're starting the season in AAA. That is huge variance, right? The minor leagues versus a major league like 5-starter is a massive difference. And so that's why I that's why I have him here. There's still a lot that I need to see out of Montero. Again, none of this is me claiming that one thing or another is going to happen. It's just the players that I like. Time will tell. I don't know what I don't know. We got to see how these players look the rest of the way. If the season started tomorrow, 2025 season, that is, Montero would obviously not be a part of the rotation. But Reese Olson last year got called up in June, struggled a lot early on, had a really high ERA, had a 7 ERA or a 9 ERA in Toledo before getting called up, got called up to the majors, took a lot of lumps, and then in August, September was really good, and then started off the season this year in the rotation. So it's very far from impossible, but a lot of things need to be adjusted on for Montero. So he's the player that I think kind of has the most riding on these last couple of months. But I think everybody we mentioned today, what is that, about a third of the roster, maybe even closer to half of the roster, probably about, the bullpen, I just said everybody. So if you omit that, then yeah, probably about a third of the roster here has a lot to play for the rest of the way. The Tigers kick off a series against the Seattle Mariners tonight. They will play a 3-game set over in Seattle, so 9:40 p.m. start times all week. Like I said, 3-game set. We have Montero against Luis Castillo on Tuesday. We have Tarek Skubal against George Kirby on Wednesday. And then we have, I believe it's just TBD for the Tigers against Brian Wu on Thursday. The thing with the Mariners is I don't think anyone has any idea what I saw a tweet, which is always dangerous to go on Twitter really in general. But I saw a tweet a couple of weeks ago that I thought was really funny, and I think kind of perfectly sums up and summarizes the Mariners season so far. The Mariners are like in a video game when you go, okay, what if we gave an 100-loss team the best rotation in baseball? That is what the Seattle Mariners have been this season. They are 59-54, which currently has them as, well, I was going to say the third wild card, but the AL West is such a bleep show that if they're winning the division, if the season ended today, they would be your AL West winners. They're up a game on the Astros. Their offense has been absolutely putrid. Like really, really, really putrid. But they have one of the nastiest rotations, probably the best rotation in the entire game of baseball, and everybody in the rotation would be a top front of the line, not like an ace necessarily, but top half of the lineup, top half the rotation rather, type of pitcher for pretty much any other team in baseball. So the Tigers, who only have 2 healthy starting pitchers and whose offense is an absolute train wreck right now, it's going to be a tall task. We'll see what they do. But yeah, these are important games for the Mariners. So if you want to play spoiler a little bit, show up offensively. A lot easier said than done with this team. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow recapping game 1 of this series and talking about anything else that happens surrounding the Tigers organization. I appreciate you all greatly for tuning in on off days, post-trade deadline, when we're 7 games under 500. The real ones still keep tuning in. I appreciate you all. All right. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch y'all then, baby. Go Tigers.